Candace Adams was having a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad Tuesday. It culminated at 3:17 p.m. when Harrison Remington, the walking Greek god and tyrannical CEO of Remington Enterprises, strode past her desk in the accounting department. He didn't look at her. He never did. He just exuded an aura of infuriating, effortless perfection, leaving the scent of expensive, woody cologne and sheer intimidation in his wake. Fuming from a project he had just criticized, she furiously typed a message on her phone to her best friend, Sarah. "He is so annoyingly hot, but at the same time so stupid and unbearable. I can't stand him." She hit send with a satisfying jab of her thumb. A second later, her blood ran cold. A collective gasp, followed by a series of stifled snorts and coughs, rippled through the open-plan office. She looked at her screen in horror. She hadn't sent the message to Sarah. She had sent it to the company-wide group chat. General announcements. A chat that included all 200 employees. A chat that included Harrison Remington himself. The silence in the office was absolute. Every eye was on her. She could feel her face turning a shade of crimson she had never before experienced. She wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. On her phone screen, under her catastrophic message, a small icon appeared. Harrison Remington is typing. This was it. Public execution. But the message didn't appear in the group chat. A private notification popped up on her screen. From him. "Miss Adams, my office, now." The message was cold, surgical, and 1,000 times more terrifying than a public tirade could ever have been. The walk to his office on the top floor was a walk of shame. She passed colleagues who either stared at her with wide-eyed pity or suddenly became intensely interested in their computer screens. She stepped into his office, a vast minimalist space with a panoramic view of the city. He was standing with his back to her, looking out the window. He didn't turn around for a full, agonizing minute. Finally, he turned slowly, his phone held loosely in his hand. His face was a mask of calm, lethal neutrality, but his eyes were dancing with a dangerous, mocking light. "Hot, stupid, and unbearable," he said, his voice a low, smooth purr that sent a shiver of pure terror down her spine. He took a slow step toward her. "Please, elaborate." "Mr. Remington," Candace began, her voice a frantic, high-pitched squeak she barely recognized as her own. "I am so sorry. It was a terrible mistake, a typo. I meant to send it to my friend Sarah, not the whole company. It was unprofessional and inexcusable, and I—" He stopped her with a single raised hand. The gesture was calm, almost lazy, but it silenced her instantly. He began to walk slowly around his massive desk, circling her like a shark studying its prey. A slow, dangerous smile that did not reach his eyes played on his lips. "A mistake," he mused, his voice a low, smooth rumble. "I'm sure it was. But the words themselves, those were not a mistake, were they, Miss Adams?" She swallowed hard, unable to form a response. "Dumbfounded, I see," he continued, stopping in front of her. "Let's address your points one by one. Hot. A subjective, if not entirely inaccurate, assessment. I'll accept it." He took another step closer. "Stupid and unbearable. Now those are professional criticisms, and they wound me, Miss Adams, deeply." He was mocking her, enjoying her terror. She braced herself for the inevitable. "I understand if you want to fire me," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the knot of his perfect silk tie. He let out a short, humorless laugh. "Fire you? Oh no, that would be far too easy, too merciful." He leaned against his desk, crossing his arms, and frankly, much less entertaining. "I prefer rehabilitation." A cold knot of dread tightened in her stomach. "Rehabilitation?" "Yes," he said, his eyes glinting with a cruel, brilliant light. "You believe I am stupid and unbearable. Clearly, you have not had enough exposure to my management style. We need to rectify that." He pushed himself off the desk. "As of tomorrow morning, you are no longer an accountant. You are my new executive assistant. You will be seated at the desk directly outside this office. You will organize my schedule. You will fetch my coffee. You will book my travel. You will witness firsthand every stupid decision and every unbearable moment of my day. He paused, letting the full weight of his sentence land on her. This is your punishment, Miss Adams. You are going to get to know your boss intimately. Candace stared at him, her mouth agape, her mind reeling in shock. This was a nightmare, a waking, tailored suit-wearing nightmare. You can't be serious, she stammered. He leaned in, his face just inches from hers. The clean, sharp scent of his aftershave was dizzying. Try me, he whispered, his voice a silken threat. He then straightened up, a triumphant smirk on his face. By the way, your first assignment is to call the man you were supposed to have dinner with tonight and cancel. What? Why? Because, he said, turning and walking back to his chair, your hot, stupid, and unbearable boss needs you to work late. Candace's first day as Harrison's executive assistant was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Her new desk was in a small, glass-walled anteroom right outside his office, a fishbowl designed for his constant, scrutinizing observation. Her punishment began immediately. Her tasks were a series of absurd, humiliating, and utterly pointless errands clearly designed to break her spirit. First, he demanded she reorganize his extensive collection of fountain pens. By nib size, then by ink color, then alphabetically by manufacturer, he instructed, without looking up from his computer. It took her 2 hours. Next, he sent her on a quest across the city to find a specific brand of imported sparkling water. The one with the blue label, not the green one. And the bubbles must be small and aggressive, he said, his face perfectly straight. The final, most soul-crushing task was a 200-page market analysis report he had written. He dropped it on her desk with a heavy thud. I've decided I don't like the font, he said coolly. Reformat the entire document. I want to see options. Any other assistant would have quit, or cried, or both. But Candace was fueled by a simmering, defiant rage. If he wanted to play a game, she would play it better. She didn't just reformat the report. She created 3 separate versions, each with a different, elegant font. She then wrote a 2-page comparative readability study, complete with fabricated charts and data, outlining the pros and cons of each font choice and making a final, professional recommendation. She found the water after 3 hours of searching and placed it on his desk with a small, handwritten note. I trust the bubble aggression meets your standards. And the pens? She organized them perfectly, exactly as he had instructed, but she arranged them on his desk in a vibrant, mocking rainbow pattern. At 6 o'clock, he called her into his office. The room was dark, save for the glow of his monitor. The organized pens, the water bottle, and her report sat on his desk, a silent testament to her sarcastic precision. He was leaning back in his chair, his expression unreadable. You think this is funny, Miss Adams? He asked, his voice dangerously quiet. I thought the objective was to be a thorough and efficient assistant, Mr. Remington, she replied, her voice a melody of pure, innocent professionalism. Was my work not to your satisfaction? He stared at her for a long, silent moment. She met his gaze without flinching, her heart pounding, but her expression serene. She saw a war happening in his eyes, a battle between his fury at her insubordination and something else, something she had never expected to see. A flicker of reluctant admiration, a spark of genuine amusement. He had tried to break her, and she had thrown it right back in his face, wrapped in a bow of perfect, sarcastic competence. He let out a short, humorless laugh, shaking his head as if in disbelief. He stood up and walked to the window. Pack your bags, he said abruptly, his back to her. Her heart sank. This was it. He was finally firing her. We have a business trip to Chicago in 2 days, he continued. You'll be handling the itinerary. He turned to look at her, a new, dangerous glint in his eye. And pray the airline doesn't lose my luggage, Miss Adams, because if they do, I can assure you, it will be your fault. They arrived at the most exclusive hotel in Chicago, a place of hushed luxury and old-world charm. Candace, who had meticulously booked 2 separate adjoining suites, stood by as Harrison checked them in. The receptionist, a young woman with a practiced, polite smile, typed at her computer. Her smile faltered. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Remington," she began, her voice full of professional panic. "There seems to have been a system error. We're completely overbooked. We only have 1 suite available." She looked from Harrison to Candace, her eyes wide. "The presidential suite. It's our best room, of course, but it only has 1 king-sized bed." Candace froze. This couldn't be happening. Harrison, however, didn't even blink. He turned to Candace, a slow, malicious smile spreading across his face. "Well, Miss Adams," he said, his voice a low, mocking purr, "it seems your luck has just run out." The presidential suite was a palace, larger than Candace's entire apartment building, but the single, enormous bed in the center of the master bedroom dominated the space, a silent, intimidating promise of a long and awkward night. The evening was a succession of tense, electric moments. After a long and difficult business dinner, they returned to the suite. Harrison disappeared into the bathroom first. When he emerged, Candace's breath caught in her throat. He was wearing only a pair of low-slung gray sweatpants, a towel slung around his neck. His chest and shoulders, sculpted and defined from what was clearly a disciplined workout routine, glistened under the soft light of the suite. The hot part of her accidental text message had been a gross understatement. She was sitting in an armchair, pretending to read a report, but her eyes betrayed her. They flickered up, taking in the sight of him, before she quickly, guiltily, looked back down at the page, her cheeks burning. He saw it. Of course he saw it. He stopped, a knowing, triumphant smirk on his face. "Don't worry, Candace," he said, his voice a low, teasing rumble. "Your hot, stupid, and unbearable boss is just going to get a shirt." The direct quote from her text made her blush a shade of crimson she didn't know was possible. Later that night, sleep was impossible. She lay on her side of the massive bed, as far from him as she could get, her body rigid. She could hear the soft, steady sound of his breathing, could feel the warmth radiating from his body across the cool sheets. She must have drifted off, because she was jolted awake by a sound. A low, guttural murmur from the other side of the bed. She turned her head. In the dim light filtering through the window, she saw him. He was caught in the grip of a nightmare. His face was tense, his brow furrowed. He was tossing his head back and forth on the pillow, and then he spoke, his voice a choked, broken whisper. "Dad, please, don't." The sound was so full of a raw, childish vulnerability that it shattered the image of the powerful, arrogant CEO. In his sleep, he was not Harrison Remington. He was just a boy, terrified of his own father. Hesitantly, her anger and her own discomfort forgotten, she reached out a hand and gently touched his shoulder. "Harrison," she whispered, "wake up! You're dreaming!" He jolted awake, his eyes flying open, wide with a disoriented panic. He sat up, breathing heavily, his body drenched in a cold sweat. And then he saw her. He saw her concerned face, her hand still on his shoulder. The panic in his eyes slowly faded, replaced by a look of such profound, unguarded surprise and relief. "Sorry," he murmured, his voice hoarse from sleep and fear. He didn't pull away. Instead, his own hand came up and covered hers on his shoulder. His grip was surprisingly tight, not like a boss, but like a man who was afraid of being left alone in the dark. "Stay," he whispered, the single word a raw, desperate plea. "Just for a minute." Candace stayed. She didn't move her hand. She simply sat there on the edge of the massive bed, a silent, steady presence in the dimly lit room. His plea, so raw and so completely out of character, had disarmed her completely. Slowly, the tension drained from his shoulders. He let go of her hand and leaned back against the headboard, running a hand over his face. "Long night," he muttered, a weak attempt to regain his composure. "You were dreaming," she said softly. He didn't respond for a long moment. The silence in the room was different now. It was not the silence of a truce, but of a shared, fragile vulnerability. "My father," he began, his voice a low, rough murmur, his gaze fixed on the city lights outside the window. "He's demanding. He expects perfection. Always has. The Remington Empire wasn't just built on success. It was built on the absolute refusal to fail. Any failure, any weakness, was unacceptable." He spoke of a childhood filled not with affection, but with expectations. Of a father who saw him not as a son, but as an heir, a project to be molded into a perfect successor. The pressure, the constant crushing weight of having to be infallible, had been the defining force of his entire life. As he spoke, Candace saw the stupid and unbearable CEO she had railed against in her text message dissolve, replaced by a lonely boy who had never been allowed to be anything less than perfect. She found herself responding in kind, her own walls beginning to crumble in the intimacy of the pre-dawn quiet. She told him about her own dreams, about her passion for art history, a passion she had set aside for the practical, sensible world of accounting. She spoke of her desire to one day work in a museum, to be surrounded by beauty and history, a world away from spreadsheets and balance sheets. They talked for hours, their voices low whispers in the dark. The barrier between them, the one built of anger and power dynamics, completely disintegrated. They were just two people, sharing their hidden scars, their secret dreams. As the first, faint light of dawn began to filter through the window, they fell silent, exhausted. They were sitting on the bed, leaning against the headboard so close their shoulders were touching. The sun began to rise, casting a soft, golden glow across the room, illuminating her face. He turned to look at her, his expression soft, his eyes full of an emotion she had never seen before. He reached out, his touch hesitant, almost shy, and gently tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. The simple, tender gesture made her heart stop. "I shouldn't have done this to you," he whispered, his voice full of a genuine, profound regret. He was not talking about the hotel room. He was talking about all of it. The punishment, the games, the humiliation. "And I shouldn't have called you stupid," she replied, her own voice a soft murmur. The moment was so charged, so real, so completely unbearable, that it had only one possible conclusion. He leaned in, and she met him halfway. The kiss was slow, tender, a quiet, hesitant exploration. It was not the desperate, possessive kiss she might have imagined. It was a question, a confession, a silent acknowledgement of the powerful, undeniable connection that had grown between them in the dark. It was the first moment of pure, unadulterated romance they had ever shared. They pulled apart, both of them breathless, stunned by the reality of what had just happened. And then, the shrill, impersonal alarm on Harrison's phone blared, shattering the spell. 7 a.m., time to prepare for the board meeting. Reality came crashing back. The flight home was a study in agonizing silence. Harrison was once again Harrison Remington, the CEO. He put on his noise-canceling headphones and buried himself in a financial report, his face a mask of cool, impenetrable professionalism. He didn't speak to her. He didn't even look at her. He was terrified of the vulnerability he had shown, of the kiss that had broken all his rules. When they landed, he stood up, his armor fully back in place. "Good work on the trip, Miss Adams," he said, his voice clipped, formal. "I'll see you in the office tomorrow." He turned and walked away without a backward glance, leaving Candace standing alone at the gate, the ghost of his kiss still on her lips, her heart aching with the sudden, brutal coldness of his retreat. The cold shoulder Harrison gave her on the flight back was more painful than any of his previous humiliations. The vulnerability he had shown in Chicago, the tender, breathtaking kiss, it had all been erased, locked away behind his usual mask of cool, professional indifference. Candace was hurt, confused, and furious with herself for letting her guard down. Determined not to let him see how much his retreat had affected her, she threw herself into her work with a vengeance. She was efficient, polite, and as distant as he was. If he wanted to pretend that night never happened, she would play along. but she decided she wouldn't be his lonely, pining assistant. Mark, a charming and handsome lawyer from the company's legal department, had been subtly trying to get her attention for weeks. He was everything Harrison was not: warm, approachable, and openly appreciative of her work. So, when Mark stopped by her desk on Wednesday afternoon and asked her to lunch, Candace did something she hadn't done before. She accepted, and she did it with an extra bright smile, making sure that Harrison, who was watching from his glass-walled office, had a perfect view of her leaving, laughing, with another man. From his aquarium, Harrison watched them go. He felt a hot, irrational wave of irritation wash over him. He told himself it was because his executive assistant was taking an extended lunch when there was work to be done. But the truth, the one he refused to acknowledge, was that the image of her smiling with Mark was a knot tightening in his gut. There was a particular history with Mark, a private rivalry that made the sight of him with Candace feel like a personal trespass. Candace couldn't understand it. If Harrison disliked Mark so much, why hadn't he fired him? The fact that he kept him around, yet clearly despised him, was a puzzle she couldn't solve. Harrison spent the rest of the afternoon in a foul mood. He found himself calling Candace's desk phone every 30 minutes with absurd, transparently false pretexts. "Miss Adams, where is the quarterly report from 2 years ago? I need it immediately. Miss Adams, I need you to verify my schedule for next Thursday of 2027. When she finally returned, her face flushed and happy from lunch, he felt another, sharper pang of something he refused to name. Later that day, Mark approached her desk again, leaning against it with a casual, confident smile. "Lunch was great," he said. "How about a drink after work?" Before she could answer, the intercom on her desk buzzed, Harrison's voice cutting through the air, cold and sharp. "Miss Adams, my office, immediately." When she walked in, he didn't look at her. He pointed to a massive stack of binders on the corner of his desk. "I need you to cross-reference all of these contracts with the digital archives from last year," he said, his voice dangerously neutral. "I need it on my desk by morning." It was a ridiculous, pointless, and mind-numbingly tedious task. It was a task designed for one purpose, and one purpose only: to keep her in the office all night, far away from Mark. Candace looked at the mountain of paper, then at him. A slow, dawning realization spread across her face. She was beginning to understand what was really happening. She realized that, for some reason, Harrison didn't want her with Mark, but it seemed to be more than just jealousy. Harrison's subtle war of attrition intensified. He began to watch Candace's schedule like a hawk, his timing becoming almost comically predictable. The moment Mark would approach her desk, Harrison would emerge from his office as if summoned by an invisible alarm. "Miss Adams, good thing I caught you," he said one afternoon, appearing just as Mark was about to invite her to lunch. "We need to discuss the catering for the Tokyo delegation's visit. It's urgent." Candace sighed, ready to cancel with Mark yet again. But to her complete surprise, Mark turned to Harrison with a calm, firm smile. "Sorry, Harrison," he said, his tone one of casual equality, not of an employee to a CEO. "But Candace is having lunch with me today. I'm sure your urgent catering crisis can wait until after 2 p.m. The use of his first name, the confident and almost challenging tone, it created a strange, silent standoff in the middle of the office. Harrison stared at Mark, his jaw tight, visibly annoyed. For a moment, Candace thought he would explode, but then, for a reason she couldn't comprehend, he backed down. 2 o'clock then, Miss Adams," Harrison said through clenched teeth, before turning and stalking back into his office. The incident left Candace bewildered. Mark had just gone head-to-head with the CEO, and won. The game escalated at the end of the week. Mark invited her to a movie over the weekend. Harrison, who had clearly been listening from his office, emerged immediately. "Miss Adams, before you make any plans," he said, dropping a thick folder onto her desk with a heavy thud, "I need you to finish this project analysis. The deadline is Monday morning. No exceptions." It was a mountain of work, clearly designed to ruin her entire weekend. She looked at the folder in despair, but Mark intervened again. "Harrison, he said, his voice calm. "Can we talk for 5 minutes?" Alone. The two men disappeared into Harrison's office and closed the door. Candace couldn't hear the conversation, but she could see their tense, animated gestures through the glass walls. It looked less like a discussion and more like a negotiation. 5 minutes later, Mark emerged, a tranquil, satisfied smile on his face. "Problem solved," he said, leaning against her desk. "Your urgent project has been optimized. You're free for the weekend." Candace was in shock. "How did you do that? What did you say to him?" Mark just winked at her. She watched him walk away, a giant question mark forming in her mind. For the rest of the afternoon, Harrison remained locked in his office, emanating an aura of contained fury, but he didn't say a single word to her. The question was now unavoidable, a constant nagging presence in her thoughts. Who was Mark, really? The week ended, but the questions in Candace's mind only grew louder. The dynamic between Harrison and Mark was a puzzle she couldn't solve. On Monday, Mark approached her desk at the end of the day. "I managed to get a reservation at that little Italian place you wanted to try," he said, his smile warm and genuine. "Tonight at 8? Candace's face lit up. It was a place that was notoriously hard to book. "Yes, I'd love that." As if on cue, an email from Harrison landed in her inbox. The subject line was a single cold word: urgent. The body of the message read, "Miss Adams, I require your presence in my office after hours. We have urgent matters to discuss." The timing was too perfect to be a coincidence. This was another one of his games, and she was done playing. At 6:30, the office was empty. Candace walked into Harrison's office, but instead of sitting down, she stopped in front of his desk, her arms crossed, and waited. He didn't look up, his focus entirely on some papers. "I need you to review the quarterly projections from 2019. I want a comparative summary for tomorrow." He kept talking, but stopped when he noticed her silence. He finally raised his eyes and saw her standing there, her expression serious. "Why are you looking at me like that?" "I'm not doing it, Harrison," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I'm not playing this game anymore." He frowned. "What game?" "The game where you're too selfish to admit you feel something, but too possessive to let me move on," she said, her voice gaining strength. "You don't want me, but you don't want anyone else to have me. And I'm tired of it. I deserve more than being a pawn on your chessboard." Her accusation wasn't a shout. It was a statement of fact, which made it cut even deeper. The silence in the room was heavy. Harrison didn't explode. He just stared at her, and for the first time she saw defeat in his eyes. He let out a long, weary sigh, running a hand through his hair. "You're right," he admitted, his voice low, almost a whisper. "I don't know what I'm doing. I just know that the idea of you with him, it's driving me crazy, and I don't know how to stop it." He stood up and walked slowly toward her, his expression a mixture of desperation and desire. "Teach me how to stop, Candace," he pleaded, "or give me a reason not to." He stopped just inches from her, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. Before she could respond, he whispered, "Because I can't fight this anymore." And then he kissed her. The kiss was not one of anger, but of complete and utter surrender. It was slow and deep, and filled with all the confession he couldn't put into words. It was the breaking of his own rules, the tearing down of his own walls. It was everything. The kiss in the office was not an ending. It was a beginning. It shattered the last of the rules, the last of the pretense, and plunged them into something far more dangerous and exhilarating than their previous war of wills. That night, they didn't go home. They stayed in the vast, silent office, the city lights a glittering backdrop to their new reality. They talked until the sun came up, sharing secrets and fears they had never voiced to anyone. For the first time, they were not boss and assistant. They were just Harrison and Candace. The passion that was born from that conversation, from months of repressed tension, was overwhelming. They began an intense, but strictly clandestine romance. The nights belonged to them. They were filled with dinners at discreet, out-of-the-way restaurants where no one would recognize them, with late-night movies in his penthouse, with moments of intimacy that were more real and more profound than anything either of them had ever known. Candace was living in a dream, a secret, happy bubble, believing that this phase was just temporary, a prelude to them becoming a real public couple. During the day, however, the reality of the office was a bucket of cold water. Harrison, terrified of a scandal, of the judgment of his peers, and most of all, of the reaction of his powerful father, who was also the chairman of the board, reverted to being the cold, distant CEO. He treated Candace with an exaggerated professionalism that was almost more painful than his old hostility. The stark contrast between their passionate nights and their icy days was a brutal, emotional whiplash for Candace. She saw their annual corporate networking retreat, a weekend affair at a luxurious country estate, as the perfect opportunity. Away from the office, away from the city, perhaps he would finally relax. Perhaps he would begin to bridge the gap between their two worlds. Her hope was crushed during a planning meeting for the event. In front of the entire executive team, Harrison reviewed the guest list. "And of course," he announced, his voice cool and detached, "all executives will be bringing their partners. I myself will be accompanied by a family friend, Victoria Lancaster, for the weekend's festivities." He didn't even glance at Candace as he said it. The name, Victoria Lancaster, was a well-known socialite, the perfect, appropriate companion for a man of his stature. Later that day, alone in his office, Candace confronted him, her heart in a million pieces. "Victoria?" she asked, her voice trembling with a hurt she couldn't hide. "A family friend. And what about me, Harrison? What role do I play this weekend? The girl who takes notes at the meetings?" The pain in her voice was palpable. He looked at her, his own face a mask of tortured conflict. "Candy," he said, using his private nickname for her, his voice a low, pleading whisper. "It's just for appearances. My father will be there. It's complicated." She looked at him, at the man she loved, the man who loved her in the dark, but was ashamed of her in the light. "No, Harrison," she said, tears of disappointment welling in her eyes. "It's not complicated. It's cowardly." She turned and walked out of his office, leaving him alone with the weight of his own cowardice, and her with the heartbreaking realization that she might just be his dirty, convenient secret. The corporate retreat was a special kind of torture for Candace. Harrison, true to his word, paraded Victoria Lancaster around like a prized trophy. He laughed with her, touched her arm, and played the part of the perfect, charming power couple for the benefit of his father and the other board members. Each polite smile, each casual touch, was a fresh stab to Candace's heart. She was forced to maintain her own professional mask, organizing his schedule, taking notes during his speeches, a ghost at the feast of her own heartbreak. She was the assistant, invisible, while another woman stood in her place. Mark, the charming lawyer, saw it all. He watched the quiet, dignified pain in Candace's eyes, and he saw the way Harrison would glance at her when he thought no one was looking, his own face a mask of conflict and regret. One afternoon, Mark found Candace by a secluded lake at the edge of the property. She had escaped the party, needing a moment to breathe, and was silently crying, her shoulders shaking with the effort of holding back her sobs. She had just seen Harrison and Victoria walking hand in hand through the gardens, looking for all the world like a real couple. "He doesn't deserve you, Candace," Mark said softly, sitting down on the bench beside her. Startled, she quickly wiped her eyes. "I'm fine." "No, you're not," he said gently. "And you don't have to be." Desperate for a kind word, for a shoulder to lean on, she found herself confiding in him. "I know he cares about me," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. "But he's so afraid. Afraid of his father, of what people will think, of what it all means." Mark listened patiently, his expression full of a sympathy that was completely genuine. When she finished, he looked at her, his own eyes full of a quiet sadness. "Candace," he said, his voice firm but kind, Words are easy. Anyone can say they care. But his actions are telling you a different story. They're telling you that his image, his convenience, is more important than your heart. Why are you waiting for a man who will only love you in secret when you deserve someone who would be proud to love you in public? His words were a bucket of cold, hard truth. They were everything she knew, but hadn't been willing to admit to herself. In that moment of shared vulnerability, of profound clarity, Mark leaned in. He gently cupped her face, his touch respectful, and he kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion or of seduction. It was a kiss of comfort, of respect, of a quiet, steady promise. And that was the moment Harrison came looking for her. He rounded the path and saw them. He saw Mark, his rival, kissing the woman he loved. A blind, possessive, and utterly irrational fury took hold of him. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he roared, his voice a low, dangerous growl as he strode toward them. "Get your hands off her!" But before he could reach them, Mark stood up, placing himself between Harrison and Candace, a silent, immovable protector. "I'm doing what you haven't had the courage to do, Remington," Mark said, his voice as calm and as cutting as a surgeon's scalpel. "I'm treating her like she deserves to be treated." He looked Harrison straight in the eye. "If you can't even claim her in front of your own father, then you have no right to be jealous when another man does." The truth, spoken so plainly by his rival, left Harrison paralyzed, humiliated, and utterly speechless. He ignored Mark, his eyes pleading with Candace. "Is this what you think?" Candace, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and heartbreak, couldn't find the words to answer. Seeing her silence, Harrison's face crumpled in defeat. He turned and walked away. Mark stepped back to Candace and gently pulled her into a hug. She buried her face in his shoulder and finally let the sobs she had been holding back break free. The aftermath of the confrontation at the lake was a cold, crushing silence. Harrison disappeared. A curt, impersonal email was sent to the executive team, informing them that he had a sudden flu and would be working from home for the rest of the week. Candace read the message with a mixture of anger and contempt. She knew it wasn't the flu. It was the retreat of a coward. He had been confronted with a truth he couldn't handle, and instead of fighting for her, he had run away to hide in his glass tower. That same day, Mark invited her to dinner. It wasn't a casual invitation from a colleague. It was a clear, respectful, and intentional date. "No games, Candace," he had said. "Just dinner." Hurt, angry, and determined not to let her life be put on hold for a man who refused to claim her, she accepted. The week she spent with Mark was a revelation. He was everything Harrison was not. Present, attentive, and proud to be seen with her. He took her to the little Italian restaurant she had once mentioned wanting to try. He remembered small details from their conversations. He made her laugh, a light, genuine sound she hadn't heard from herself in months. He treated her not as a project or a secret, but as a person. She began to question everything. Why was she fighting so hard for the crumbs of affection from a man who loved her in the dark, when another man was offering her the warmth of the sun? With a heavy heart, but with a new, clear-headed resolve, she decided it was time to give a real chance to this new feeling, to this man who treated her as she deserved. The following Monday, Harrison returned to the office. He was a mess. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. His eyes were shadowed, and his usual immaculate suit seemed to hang off his frame. He had clearly been through his own personal hell. He called her into his office at the end of the day. "I'm sorry, Candace," he began, his voice hoarse, filled with a regret so profound it was almost tangible. "You were right about everything. I was a coward, an idiot. I was so afraid of losing control, of what my father would think, that I almost lost the only thing that actually matters." He took a deep breath, his eyes pleading. "I'm ready now. I'm ready to fight for you, in front of everyone." Candace listened, and every word was a double-edged sword. It was the validation she had dreamed of hearing, the confession she had ached for, and it was coming too late. "Harrison," she said, her voice calm, but weighted with a deep, profound sadness. "That's everything I ever wanted to hear from you." She looked him straight in the eye, her own heart breaking as she said the words. "But while you were hiding, I decided I deserve more than just dreams. I deserve reality." She stood up, her resolve firm. "I'm giving Mark a chance, because he treats me the way I deserve to be treated. He doesn't cancel our plans. He isn't ashamed of his feelings. And most of all, he doesn't hide me." She walked out of his office, leaving him with the devastating realization that his repentance, his readiness to finally fight, might not be enough. Confused and heartbroken, she decided to walk home, needing the cold air to clear her head. As if on cue, the sky opened up and a torrential rain began to fall, soaking her in seconds. She was crying, her tears mixing with the rain, a perfect picture of her own inner turmoil. Suddenly, a sleek black car pulled up silently beside her. The dark, tinted window of the car slid down with a soft hum. It was Mark. His face, usually so calm and composed, was etched with a genuine, immediate concern. "Candace, what are you doing?" he asked, leaning across the passenger seat. "Get in. You're going to catch pneumonia." Too tired, too cold, and too emotionally drained to argue, she pulled the door open and slid into the impeccable leather interior, dripping rainwater onto the pristine floor mats. The scent of clean leather and his subtle, fresh aftershave filled the space. They drove in silence for a few moments, the only sound the rhythmic thump of the windshield wipers and the drumming of the rain on the roof. The silence wasn't awkward. It was comforting, a quiet space for her to simply breathe. "Your apartment is almost an hour's walk from here," he said finally, his tone a gentle, humorous chiding meant to break the tension. "Were you planning on walking the whole way in this downpour?" I needed to walk," she replied, her voice a low murmur as she shivered, hugging herself for warmth. "I needed to think." He noticed her trembling immediately. He reached over and turned up the heat, a warm, dry air instantly enveloping her. "Look, my place is only 10 minutes from here. You're freezing," he said, his voice full of a practical kindness that was completely devoid of any ulterior motive. "Why don't you come over, take a hot shower, and borrow some dry clothes? I'll even make you a cup of tea. Then, when the rain stops, I can drive you home. Or you can stay in the guest room, if you prefer. No strings attached." The genuine care in his offer, the simple, uncomplicated concern for her well-being, was a balm to her bruised heart. It was so different from the complicated high-stakes world of Harrison. With Mark, everything felt easy. "Okay," she whispered, grateful. "Thank you." As they drove, the warmth of the car began to chase the chill from her bones, but the chill in her heart remained. Her mind kept replaying the scene in Harrison's office, his desperate plea coming too late. "You seem a million miles away," Mark said softly, glancing at her. "Just processing," she admitted. "A lot has happened." "I can imagine," he said, his voice carefully neutral. In the quiet intimacy of the car, her curiosity, the question that had been nagging at her for weeks, finally bubbled to the surface. "Mark," she began, her voice quiet, "I have to ask you something. At the retreat, you went head-to-head with Harrison for me. You weren't afraid of him at all. You weren't afraid of getting fired for being so bold." Mark smiled, a small, enigmatic smile as he kept his eyes on the road. "Let's just say I have good job security." "But why?" she pressed. "Why do you challenge him like that? No one else in the company dares to even question him." He was silent for a moment, as if weighing his words. "Because someone has to," he said finally. "Harrison, he's brilliant, but he's been allowed to live in a world where no one ever says no to him. He's surrounded by people who are afraid of his power. And that kind of environment doesn't build character, it builds a tyrant." His words were so insightful, so perceptive. He understood Harrison in a way no one else did. "But you're not afraid of him," she stated, more than asked. "No," he said, shaking his head slightly. I'm not. He glanced at her again, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. I couldn't be fired by him, Candace. She frowned, confused. What do you mean? He's the CEO. He took a deep breath, as if preparing to reveal a long-held secret. First, he said, his voice calm and steady, I don't work for Harrison. We work together. And second, he's not my boss. Candace was completely lost. I don't understand. Mark then revealed the secret that changed everything. Harrison and I are cousins, he said, his voice quiet but clear. The real owner of Remington Enterprises is our grandfather, Richard Remington. He put his grandsons in charge of the company years ago. Harrison, as the older one, with the more aggressive personality, got the CEO title. He's the public face of the empire, the one who makes the bold moves. He turned onto a quiet, tree-lined street. I, on the other hand, chose to be the CFO and chief legal counsel. I prefer the background, the numbers, the strategy, and treating people like equals. It's not exactly a secret, he added with a shrug, but since I don't make a point of advertising it, most people don't know. Candace sat in stunned silence, her mind reeling, trying to process the information. The kind, charming colleague who had been her confidant was, in fact, just as powerful as Harrison, if not more so. The rivalry she had witnessed, the subtle power plays, the war for her attention. It wasn't just a workplace drama. It was a family feud, and she had been standing right in the middle of it. The revelation that Mark was Harrison's cousin, an equal power in the Remington Empire, left Candace speechless. She followed him out of the car and into his house in a daze, her mind struggling to recontextualize every interaction they had ever had. He immediately guided her to a luxurious guest bathroom. Take a hot shower before you freeze, he said, his voice full of a simple, practical kindness. You can grab whatever you need. I'll leave some dry clothes for you at the door. Grateful, Candace stepped into the shower, the hot water a welcome shock, washing away not just the cold of the rain, but some of the tension from her shoulders. When she stepped out, she found a soft, cotton pajama set folded neatly on the back of the door. It was his, far too large for her, but it was warm and smelled of him. A clean, comforting scent of fresh laundry and something subtly masculine. It was the scent of safety. Wearing his pajamas, she padded downstairs and found him in the kitchen, putting the finishing touches on a simple pasta dish. A recipe, he said, was his grandmother's. As he set the table, Candace took a moment to truly look at his home for the first time. It was completely different from Harrison's cold, impersonal penthouse. While obviously expensive, Mark's house had a soul. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves overflowed with well-loved books. Interesting, eclectic art adorned the walls, and in a corner of the living room, an impressive collection of vinyl records and a state-of-the-art turntable stood proudly. She realized, with a small shiver, that the vinyl collection alone was probably worth enough to buy her old apartment. It was a quiet, understated display of immense wealth. What fascinated her was not the money itself, but the fact that in all the times they had been out, he had never once made a point of showing it off. Her attention was drawn to a framed photograph on the mantelpiece. It was a picture of a beautiful, smiling woman with kind eyes. "That's my mother," Mark said, appearing behind her with 2 glasses of wine. He handed one to her. "She passed away a few years ago. She's the one who taught me to value people over things." During dinner they laughed and shared stories. The conversation was easy, natural. She found herself asking him how he dealt with the pain of his loss without becoming bitter or closed off, a question she realized was secretly about Harrison. He answered with a quiet wisdom that resonated deep within her. "Candace, pain can either break us or it can rebuild us," he said, his gaze steady. "I don't think becoming a cold, petty man would have made my mother very proud." After a few glasses of wine, the atmosphere grew more intimate. He reached across the table and gently brushed a stray strand of hair from her face. "Candace," he said, his voice soft, serious. "I know things are confusing for you right now. I know you feel something for Harrison. I don't want you to feel pressured. If you decide that he's the one you want to be with, I'll understand." He paused, his eyes full of a sincere, unwavering warmth. "But I needed you to know that what I feel for you is real." His honesty, his complete lack of possessiveness, disarmed her completely. In that moment, she saw the stark difference between being someone's obsession and being someone's refuge. She leaned forward and kissed him. The kiss was a surrender. It was not the frantic, desperate passion she had known with Harrison. It was something tender and deep and connected. It was a conscious choice. They made love that night, and it was an act of profound intimacy. She felt for the first time in a very long time, completely safe, completely seen, and completely valued in the arms of a man. Candace awoke the next morning tangled in the soft sheets of Mark's bed, the morning sun streaming through the windows. He was awake, watching her, gently stroking her hair. "For the first time in a long time," she whispered, her voice husky with sleep, "I feel at peace." Mark smiled, a warm, loving smile that held no trace of victory, only contentment. "Maybe that's what love is, Candy," he said softly. "Not always a storm, but a safe harbor." In that quiet, peaceful moment, looking into his kind, steady eyes, she knew what she had to do. Her heart was no longer divided. Her choice was made. "I've made my decision," she said. They arrived at the office together later that morning, a silent, united front. Candace's phone had been exploding with missed calls and frantic text messages from Harrison. The moment they stepped out of the elevator, Harrison saw them. He ignored his cousin completely, his entire focus a laser beam of possessive fury directed at Candace. "Where were you?" he demanded, his voice a low growl as he strode toward them. "Why didn't you answer my calls?" "Harrison," she said, her voice calm, steady, a stark contrast to his barely contained rage. "We need to talk, in your office." Inside the familiar cold space, she didn't wait for him to speak. She faced him, her back straight, her resolve firm. "For a while," she began, her voice even, "I believed you cared. I believed your behavior was temporary, that you would eventually choose me, that you would be proud to be with me. But I realize now that your secret was just convenient for you." She took a deep breath, the words coming out with a painful clarity. "I spent the last few days with a man who showed me what it feels like to be truly loved, to be respected, to be someone's priority, not their dirty little secret." She looked him straight in the eye. "And I choose him. I choose Mark." The words hit him with the force of a physical blow. He stumbled back, his face pale, his eyes wide with a disbelief that quickly curdled into a desperate, agonizing pain. She placed her letter of resignation on his desk. "I can't work here anymore," she said, her voice softening slightly with a pang of pity for the man she had once loved. "It wouldn't be fair to anyone. Goodbye, Harrison." She turned to leave. "Candace, wait," he whispered, his voice a raw, broken plea. But it was too late. She walked out of the office, closing the door on her past, and walked toward her future, leaving the powerful, untouchable CEO completely, utterly, and finally, alone and broken. 1 year later, the scene opens in Mark's elegant home, which he now shares with Candace. The space is filled with warmth and life. Candace is at her laptop, a look of intense focus on her face as she finalizes a project for her own successful accounting consultancy firm, which she launched 6 months ago. Mark enters the room, theatrically tossing a folder onto the table. He's beaming. "Officially on vacation," he announces with a radiant smile, "for 1 whole month." Candace looks up, her face breaking into a happy, surprised smile. "And where is the great CFO taking us?" she teases. He walks over, takes her hands, and pulls her to her feet. His expression is serious, his eyes full of love. "To the place my favorite person has always dreamed of seeing," he says. "Pack your bags, Candace. We're going to Greece." The trip is a dream. They explore the ancient streets of Athens, sail through the turquoise waters of the Aegean, and get lost in the winding, whitewashed alleys of tiny villages. There is no work, no stress, only the easy, comfortable companionship of two people who are deeply in love. In Santorini, they charter a private boat. As the sun begins to set, painting the sky in breathtaking shades of orange and pink over the caldera, Mark wraps his arms around her from behind. "It's everything I ever dreamed of," she whispers, leaning her head back against his chest. "I know," he replies, kissing the top of her head. I paid attention. On their last night, he takes her to a surprise dinner. It's on a secluded terrace in a small village in Oya, with a stunning view of the volcano. The space is decorated with hundreds of flickering candles and white flowers, and a lone violinist plays softly in the corner. "Mark, what is all this?" she asks, her voice thick with emotion. He guides her to the table, but instead of sitting, he takes her hands in his. His expression is nervous, serious, and overflowing with love. "Candace," he begins, his voice a little shaky. "A year ago, I found you by a lake, crying, your heart broken by a man who didn't deserve you. And I told you that you deserved someone who would love you in public. I have spent every one of the last 365 days trying to be that man." He slowly gets down on one knee. "I'm not a man of storms and games, Candace. I'm a man of safe harbors and kept promises. And I promise to love you, to respect you, and to never, ever hide you from the world." He opens a small velvet box, revealing a simple, elegant diamond ring that sparkles in the candlelight. "Candace Adams, will you marry me?" With tears of pure, unadulterated happiness streaming down her face, she kneels in front of him. "Mark Remington," she says, taking his face in her hands. "Thank you for teaching me what love is really supposed to feel like. You are my peace and my safe harbor." She laughs through her tears. "Yes, 1,000 times yes, I will marry you," she whispers, her voice choked with emotion. He slides the ring onto her finger, and they kiss. A deep, profound kiss, filled with peace and certainty. It is the image of a love born not from drama, but from kindness, from respect, and from the conscious, beautiful choice to be happy, together. Our story ends here, my dears, and it leaves us with a question. What is true love? Is it the chaotic, all-consuming fire that we desperately want to fix? Or is it the quiet, steady warmth that heals us? Candace made her choice, reminding us that sometimes we don't end up with the person our heart is passionate for, but with the one who finally teaches our heart how to be at peace. Now, I want to ask you, who would you have chosen? The thrilling, turbulent storm of Harrison, hoping he would change for you? Or the gentle, certain sunrise of Mark, who loved you as you were from the start? Leave your answer in the comments. I can't wait to read your thoughts. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to show it some love with a like. Until the next story.